Imagine a millionaire CEO, successful in every way that matters to the world: wealth, power, influence. He had everything anyone could dream of. A flourishing business, fast cars, luxurious homes, and an unshakable reputation in the corporate world. And yet, for all his accomplishments, there was one thing he couldn't buy: love. At 28 years old, he had rejected love. He had dismissed it as a distraction, a mere inconvenience in the pursuit of his goals. He had seen relationships falter, often because people were more interested in his money and status than in who he truly was. Over time, he came to believe that love wasn't meant for people like him. It was for those who had the time and the luxury to indulge in feelings and emotions. For him, success had been the only thing that truly mattered. It was his armor, his identity, and his purpose. But deep down, something was missing. He wasn't sure what it was, but there was an emptiness that lingered in his chest, one he couldn't ignore no matter how many meetings he attended or how many deals he closed. It was as if he had conquered the world in every way that mattered, but still felt like something vital had been left out of the equation. He grew up with the idea that hard work, ambition, and sacrifice were the keys to a meaningful life. His father, a stern and successful businessman, had taught him that emotions were weaknesses, that to truly succeed, you had to shut out distractions and focus solely on the task at hand. Love, he was told, was something that got in the way of progress. It was something that could derail a person, make them soft, and so he built his life around that belief, climbing the corporate ladder, making deals that would take him to the top, and shoving aside anything that didn't serve that singular goal. Yet, as time went on, he began to realize that something crucial was missing. The years he had spent focusing solely on his career, on material gain, had somehow made him a stranger to himself. Even when he achieved his wildest dreams, purchasing penthouses, driving luxury cars, making connections with the most powerful people in the world, he couldn't silence the quiet feeling that his success had come at the expense of something far more meaningful. It had come at the expense of connection. Then, one day, during his usual route to work, something unexpected happened. His perfectly planned day, filled with meetings and strategies, was interrupted by the sight of her. She was sitting at a bus stop on a busy street corner in the city, dressed in worn-out clothes, with a tiredness to her that could only come from years of surviving the harshness of life. She had her head resting against the metal bench, eyes closed in a deep sleep, unaware of the world around her. To anyone else, she might have been just another homeless person in the city, someone to glance at and quickly forget. But for him, in that moment, everything else faded away. She was nothing like the women he had dated, nothing like the people he surrounded himself with. She had no interest in appearances, no pretense to put on. She was simply there, existing in the world in a way he had never seen before. He stopped in his tracks, watching her for a long time. The cacophony of the city, the honking horns, the shouting vendors, all seemed to blur around him. All he could focus on was her, the calmness of her posture, the way she seemed unaffected by the rush of people around her. It was mesmerizing. How could someone, with nothing to her name, seem so at peace, while he, with everything at his fingertips, felt so empty? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. It was absurd. He was a CEO, a man with power, wealth, and respect. He had no business standing there, staring at a woman who clearly had nothing. But something about her made him pause. Something about the vulnerability in her. Her rawness made him question everything he had taken for granted. It wasn't just her external appearance. It was something deeper, something intangible. She was alone, with no apparent resources. Yet there was an aura about her. It was almost as if she had found peace, something he could never seem to grasp no matter how much he achieved. In the brief moments he stood there, he realized that he had been chasing the wrong things for far too long. But, despite the strange connection he felt, he told himself to walk away. There was no reason to overthink it. There was no reason to dwell on someone who clearly had no place in his life. But when he turned to leave, his gaze lingered on her one last time, and just as he was about to step away, he noticed something. The woman, this stranger, seemed to stir slightly, adjusting her position as if waking up. Something in her movements called him back. Without thinking, he walked over. Slowly, cautiously. "Excuse me," he said, his voice hesitant, unsure. She stirred but didn't fully wake. He repeated himself. "Excuse me." Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they locked onto his with a glance so intense that it made his breath catch. It was a gaze that cut through all the layers of his life, stripping him of the facade he had so carefully built. He stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said awkwardly. I noticed you, and I wanted to check if you're all right." Huh. She blinked at him, taking a moment to process his presence. Then, as though the question itself seemed unnecessary, she gave him a tired yet polite smile. "I'm fine," she said simply, her voice soft but steady. "Just tired." He stood there for a beat longer than he expected, staring at her. Her answer wasn't what he was expecting, but it seemed to satisfy something deep inside him, some desire to know she was okay. He didn't ask her more questions. Instead, he felt compelled to offer her something, anything. But what could he give her that would mean anything in a world where he was so disconnected from the people around him? If you ever need anything," he started, his voice unsure. "I can help." She looked at him, and this time there was something different in her eyes, something that wasn't dismissive, but cautious. "Help?" she repeated, as though the concept itself was foreign to her. "I'm fine. I'm not asking for help." He didn't know what else to say. The words seemed so inadequate. But for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he felt a strange need to reach out, not as a CEO, not as a successful businessman, but as a human being. "I know, but I just wanted you to know you're not alone." It was the most vulnerable thing he had said in a long time. And for some reason, those words seemed to resonate more deeply than anything else he had ever said in his life. She nodded, acknowledging him, but she didn't offer any more words. There was a brief silence between them before she slowly stood up, brushing the dust off her clothes. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice genuine but distant. "I'm just waiting for the bus, then I'll go." He didn't know why, but something in him told him to stay, to keep talking. But as he looked at her one last time, he realized she was already walking away. Part 2. The days that followed were strange for him. He couldn't shake the image of her from his mind, the woman who had captured his attention so suddenly, so completely. Every morning, he'd find himself walking the same route to his office, hoping, but not expecting, to see her again. He'd tell himself it was just a fleeting curiosity, but deep down, he knew it was more. There was something about the way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken to him, that had stayed with him. And though he had everything a man could ask for: wealth, power, success, none of it felt as real as that brief encounter. In the world he lived in, where everyone had an agenda, where appearances and status were everything, her simplicity had been a breath of fresh air. She didn't care about his title or his net worth. She didn't need him to be anything more than what he was in that moment. There was no agenda, no expectations, just two strangers, in a moment of shared vulnerability. He had always prided himself on being able to control everything, From his business deals to the way he presented himself in the world, he had mastered the art of being in control. But with her, there was no control. The power dynamics were non-existent. She wasn't impressed by him, and that made her the most intriguing person he'd ever met. And that, of course, terrified him. It wasn't just about her being different from the women he usually met. It was the fact that she made him feel exposed, vulnerable. For the first time in years, he was questioning his own motivations. What was he really after? Was it success, or was he just chasing something, anything, to fill the emptiness he had never quite addressed? Despite his uncertainty, he couldn't stay away. He returned to the bus stop every day, hoping to see her again. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, he did. It was early in the morning, and he had been running late for a meeting, his mind already full of numbers and strategies. But as soon as he rounded the corner, he saw her sitting on the bench, just as she had been before. She was the same, her hair slightly messy, her clothes worn, but there was something different about her, a sense of peace, of quiet assurance that seemed to radiate from her. It was as if she had a secret she wasn't sharing, something that made her stand apart from everyone else in the world. This time, he didn't hesitate. He didn't second-guess himself. He walked right up to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hi," he said, his voice steady, but a little out of breath from the unexpected encounter. She looked up, surprised to see him standing there again. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, and for a second, he thought she might just walk away. But instead, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was enough to make his heart skip a beat. "Hi," she replied, her voice soft, almost cautious. "You're back." "I couldn't stay away," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. He felt a little foolish saying it aloud, but there it was. "I had to see you again." She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Why?" He paused, unsure how to put it into words. How could he explain that she had somehow gotten under his skin, made him feel something he had never felt before? How could he explain that, despite his success, he felt lost and disconnected, and she was the only person who had made him feel human again? "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I guess. I just feel like there's something here, something real." "Whoa." She tilted her head, studying him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Something real?" she repeated, almost to herself. Then, looking up at him again, she said, "I don't know what you're looking for, but I don't have a lot to offer." Her words stung more than he expected. She wasn't wrong, of course. She had nothing to give him, at least not in the way he was used to. No wealth, no status, no social standing. She wasn't offering him anything material, anything he could hold in his hand. But somehow, that made her even more valuable. She wasn't offering him anything he could buy. She was offering him something much rarer, her presence, her authenticity. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, his voice softer now. "I just want to get to know you. That's all." For a long moment, she didn't respond. She simply stared at him, as if weighing his words, searching for any hint of insincerity, and maybe she found none. Because, after what felt like an eternity, she finally nodded. "All right," she said. "We can talk." And that was how it started. Their first conversation wasn't filled with grand gestures or promises. It was simply a conversation between two strangers, one who had everything and one who had nothing, sitting on a bench at a bus stop, talking about life. As they spoke, he learned more about her than he had expected. Her name was Lila, and she had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who had done her best to provide, but there was never enough. Lila had moved to the city to find work, but life had been hard. She had lived in shelters, on the streets, and in the corners of the city that no one else cared to look at. She was used to surviving, not thriving. "People don't look at me twice," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "They don't see me. They just see a woman who doesn't fit into their world. And that's fine. I've learned to keep my head down and keep moving." He felt a pang of guilt at her words. It was a reality he had never truly considered before. In his world, people were always looking to climb higher, to outdo each other. But in her world, people were just trying to survive. And yet, she didn't seem bitter. She wasn't angry at the world for treating her like this. She had accepted her place in it. And that was both humbling and heartbreaking. "I don't think you're invisible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, her eyes softening. "That's nice of you to say. But it doesn't change the fact that no one looks twice." The conversation stretched on, but in that moment, something shifted between them. The world around them seemed to fade away. There was no wealth, no status, no expectations. There was only the two of them, sharing a conversation that felt real. For once, he wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the man with everything, and she wasn't the woman with nothing. They were simply two people, connected by an understanding that transcended their differences. Part 3. The days following their conversation felt different for him. There was an underlying shift that he couldn't quite explain. Despite the rush of his daily life, the constant barrage of emails and meetings, his thoughts often drifted back to her. Lila. It was strange, really, how quickly she had invaded his thoughts. He had never felt like this before. Not with anyone. He was used to people admiring him, seeking him out for his status or wealth, but with her, it was different. She didn't care about any of that. She simply saw him, and in doing so, she had uncovered a part of him he had long buried. He found himself seeking her out more often, even though he didn't really know why. Every time he returned to the bus stop, hoping for another encounter, he found himself questioning the pull he felt toward her. What was it? Was it just the novelty of her existence, so different from everything he knew? Or was it something deeper, something that made him feel more alive than he had in years? For her, the days following their meeting had been equally strange. Lila had spent so much of her life building walls, protecting herself from the harshness of the world. She had learned to trust no one, to rely solely on herself. She had always assumed that she was invisible to the world, just another face in the crowd. But with him, things were different. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time, and that terrified her. She hadn't expected to be drawn to him. He was everything she had been taught to avoid, rich, powerful, and living in a world that had always seemed so far out of her reach. And yet, when he spoke to her, there was no sense of superiority, no judgment. He didn't look at her with pity. Instead, he listened. He asked questions. He cared. And for the first time, she felt like someone was genuinely interested in who she was, not just what she could offer. But despite the connection they shared, she couldn't shake the doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. What did he see in her? Was it just a fleeting curiosity, or was he really looking for something more? Could someone like him, someone who had everything, ever truly be interested in someone like her, someone who had nothing? The questions nagged at her as she continued her daily routine. She kept seeing him, every day, standing on the edge of the street, watching her. The uncertainty in her mind grew, but so did something else, a spark of hope, however faint. She couldn't deny that there was a part of her that wanted to explore this connection, to see where it might lead. But she didn't want to set herself up for disappointment. And yet, every time he walked toward her, with that same quiet determination in his eyes. She found herself unable to resist. It wasn't the wealth or the power or any of the superficial things that had always defined his world. It was something simpler. It was the way he made her feel like she mattered, like she wasn't invisible. One afternoon, as she sat at the bus stop again, lost in her thoughts, she saw him approaching. He was walking slowly, but with purpose, as though he had made a decision. For a brief moment, she considered walking away, avoiding the conversation. She wasn't ready to confront her own feelings, let alone face the uncertainty of where this was all going. But something told her to stay. So, she did. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He simply stood there, looking down at her with an intensity she had never seen before. "I've been thinking about you," he said finally, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "About us. About this connection we have." She met his gaze, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "You don't have to," she said quickly, trying to brush it off. "I mean, we barely know each other." "I know," he replied, his tone softening. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's something more here, something real." Her heart skipped a beat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Or was this just another fleeting moment, something that would fade as quickly as it had appeared? "I don't want to rush into anything," he continued, his voice growing more vulnerable. "But I can't deny how I feel. I'm not asking for anything from you. I want to get to know you better." Lila's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time building walls, keeping herself guarded, that she didn't know how to open up. She didn't know how to trust, how to believe that someone like him could really care about her. But something in his words, in his eyes, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like everyone else. I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready to let someone in." He knelt down in front of her, taking her hand gently in his. "You don't have to be ready. I just want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." There was a long silence between them, the weight of their unspoken emotions hanging in the air. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, even as her doubts threatened to overwhelm her. Maybe it wasn't about being ready. Maybe it was about taking a leap of faith, trusting that they could figure things out together. "I don't know what this is," she said softly, looking up at him. "But I want to find out. I want to try." His face lit up with a genuine smile, and in that moment, she realized that she hadn't been wrong. There was something real between them, something that went beyond what they had in the material world, something that mattered more than anything else. And so, they began. They began to explore what this connection meant, allowing their bond to grow naturally, step by step. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, of uncertainty, but every time they were together, they felt the pull of something deeper, something worth fighting for. Part 4. As the days passed, their connection only deepened. It wasn't immediate, nor was it easy, but they found themselves falling into a rhythm. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this way, vulnerable, exposed, and yet strangely alive. With every conversation, with every shared moment, he realized that what they had was different from anything he had ever experienced. She had no expectations of him, no desire to change him or mold him into something he wasn't. She didn't care about his wealth or his success, things that had defined him for so long. What mattered to her was the man he was beneath it all. And in return, he found himself caring about her in ways that felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. She wasn't just a woman he had met by chance, She was someone who made him see the world differently, someone who made him question the things he had always taken for granted. Their conversations had started out tentative, hesitant, but now they flowed with ease. They talked about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. She told him about the years she had spent moving from one shelter to another, about the nights she had spent cold and hungry, wondering if she would make it through the next day. She talked about how she had learned to protect herself, to shut others out, because trusting people had always led to disappointment. In turn, he shared his own story about growing up in a family where success was everything, about the expectations that had been placed on him since childhood. He told her about the loneliness that came with his wealth, the way people only saw what he had, not who he was. How, despite all the people he knew and the friends he had always felt like an outsider in his own life. They weren't so different, after all. Their worlds were starkly different, yes, but the emotions they both carried, the loneliness, the longing for connection, were universal, and in each other they began to find solace. But despite the growing closeness, the doubts never fully disappeared. For him, the question was always there: could this ever work? Could someone like him, with everything, really build a future with someone like her, with so little? And for her, the fear was just as powerful. She had been burned before by life, by people who had taken more than they gave, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he would eventually walk away, just like everyone else. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of his apartment, the city lights flickering below them, he turned to her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "About what we're doing here." She looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. "What do you mean?" I mean, I don't want you to think this is just some passing thing," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I don't want you to think I'm just playing around, that I'm not serious about this." She shifted in her seat, looking down at her hands. "I don't know what you're expecting from me," she said, her voice quiet. "I don't have anything to offer you. I don't even know how to do this. How to trust someone. I'm not expecting anything," he said, his voice softening. "I just want to be with you, to see where this can go. I want to build something real with you, not just a fleeting connection." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment she didn't respond. She felt a wave of emotion rush over her. This wasn't what she had expected. She hadn't expected him to be so open, so honest. She had expected him to be like everyone else, to grow bored of her, to find someone else. But here he was, standing before her, vulnerable in a way that made her want to believe in him. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said softly, the words heavy with her fear. "I don't know if I can let myself believe that this is real." He sat down beside her, close enough for their shoulders to brush. "You don't have to trust me right away," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not asking for that. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove that this is real." She turned to face him, her heart racing. "How can I be sure?" He looked into her eyes, his gaze unwavering. "You can't. But I'm here, right now, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm willing to take this one step at a time, if you are." The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. She had spent so long running from the idea of trusting anyone, and here he was, offering her his heart without any guarantees. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she realized that maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had now, and in that, there was something worth holding on to. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of being hurt, scared of losing everything." "I know," he said, his voice gentle. I'm scared too. But we can't let fear control us, not if we want something real. For a long moment, they just sat there, side by side, the weight of their shared vulnerability hanging in the air. The city was quiet around them, the hum of life in the background almost a comforting sound. I want to try, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. I don't know what this is, but I want to see where it can go. He smiled, his heart lightening at her words. Then, let's do it, he said, taking her hand in his. Let's see where this takes us. And with that, they both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, fears, and uncertainties to face, but for the first time in a long time, they were both willing to take that journey together. Part 5. The following weeks were a mixture of quiet intimacy and looming uncertainty. They spent more time together, but the world they each came from, the worlds that had shaped them, couldn't be ignored. Despite their growing connection, there were moments when the weight of their differences became more apparent. His world was one of high-stakes business, power, and prestige. Hers was one of survival, where each day felt like a fight for the next, and vulnerability had always been a risk. But despite the tension that existed between their pasts, something kept pulling them toward each other. Every time he saw her, he felt a warmth, an ease that he had never experienced before. There was no judgment, no expectations, just the simple, unspoken understanding that they were in this together. And for her, it was the first time she had ever felt seen for who she truly was. Not just as the girl who had nothing, but as a person deserving of love. One afternoon, they sat together in a small cafe, nestled on a quiet corner of the city. It was a rare moment when the world outside seemed to slow down, and the chaos of their lives was momentarily suspended. The warmth of the coffee cups in their hands mirrored the comfort they found in each other's presence. As they sat there, he studied her, watching the way she stirred her drink, the way her lips curled slightly as she focused on the conversation. There was a calmness about her that he had come to appreciate. It was different from the world he was used to, the frantic pace, the pressure to be constantly doing, constantly achieving. With her, there was peace. I've been thinking, he began, his voice serious yet gentle, about everything. About us. About what this means. She looked up from her cup, her gaze soft but cautious. What do you mean? I mean... He hesitated, unsure how to put it into words. I don't want to complicate things. I know we come from different worlds and that scares me. But what scares me even more is the thought of not trying. The thought of not giving this, us, a real chance. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back, how much her fear of failure had been stopping her from fully embracing what was right in front of her. He wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for honesty, for a chance to build something real together. I don't know how to do this, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been good at trusting people. I've spent so long doing everything on my own, and I don't know how to let someone in. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. You don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to know everything right now. But I'm here, and I want to try, even if it's hard. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken words hanging between them. She could feel the truth in his words, and for the first time in her life she didn't feel the need to run, to hide behind her walls. Instead, she felt the pull of something stronger, hope. I want to try too, she said finally, her voice steady but filled with vulnerability. I don't know what this is, or what it will become, but I'm willing to take the chance. A wave of relief washed over him. He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that lit up his face. Then let's do it. Let's figure it out together. In that moment, something shifted between them. The walls that had been carefully built up, his fear of being vulnerable, her fear of trusting someone else, began to crumble. It wasn't going to be easy, but they both knew that they were willing to face whatever came next, as long as they were together. The days following their decision were filled with moments of quiet joy. They spent time exploring the city, talking about their dreams and their fears, and slowly building the foundation for a life that wasn't defined by their pasts. He introduced her to his world, his favorite spots in the city, the places that held meaning for him, and she shared her world with him, showing him the places she had found solace in, the hidden corners of the city where she had learned to survive. But there were still moments when doubt crept in. He couldn't help but wonder if this would all fall apart, if their differences would one day be too much to overcome. And for her, the fear was just as real. Could she truly let go of her past, the life she had built for herself in isolation, and embrace this new chapter with him? One evening, after a particularly challenging day at work, he found himself sitting on his balcony, staring out at the city. The lights twinkled below, a reminder of everything he had worked for. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He wasn't thinking about the deals he had made or the meetings he had attended. He was thinking about her. As if on cue, she walked out onto the balcony, her presence a comforting contrast to the sterile quiet of his apartment. She leaned against the railing beside him, her gaze following his. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly, her voice warm with concern. He looked over at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "I've been thinking about how easy it is to get lost in all this," he said, gesturing to the city below. "The work, the success, the constant need to be more. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe, like I don't have to keep running." She smiled softly, understanding exactly what he meant. "I get that. It's easy to get caught up in everything, like you have to keep moving forward, keep climbing higher. But sometimes, the hardest thing is stopping and just being." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "I don't want to keep running anymore. I want to slow down. I want to be here. With you." Her heart ached at his words, the raw honesty in them. She had spent so long believing that she didn't deserve someone like him, that he would eventually tire of her. But in that moment, she realized how wrong she had been. "I don't want to run either," she whispered, taking his hand in hers. "I'm here, with you." And as they stood together on that balcony, their hands intertwined, they both knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were no longer afraid of the journey. They were in this together. Part 6. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery and adaptation. They were no longer strangers, no longer two people merely testing the waters of a connection. They were starting to build something real, something that had the potential to become something lasting. Yet, in the midst of their growing closeness, the ghosts of their pasts continued to linger, reminding them that the journey ahead wouldn't be without its hurdles. For him, the contrast between his world and hers was becoming more apparent. Every day, he immersed himself in the relentless pace of his job, handling multi-million-dollar deals, managing a company that required his undivided attention. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when the demands of his work seemed to pull him away from the very thing he was trying to build with her. He knew he couldn't keep juggling both worlds indefinitely. But every time he saw her, every time he felt her hand in his or saw the way she looked at him, he knew it was worth the fight. It wasn't just about her warmth or the way she made him feel alive in a world that often felt cold and transactional. It was about how she had become his anchor. She wasn't someone who needed him to be a success, or someone who cared about his bank balance. She cared about him. For the first time in his life, he was seeing himself through someone else's eyes that didn't judge him based on his achievements or failures, but simply saw him for who he was. And that realization was both humbling and terrifying. For her, things weren't as straightforward. Lila had spent most of her life fighting for her own survival. She had built walls around her heart, walls that had served her well in a world that had shown her little compassion. The idea of trusting someone, of giving herself to another person completely, was still a foreign concept to her. She had always kept people at arm's length, afraid that if she let them in, they would disappoint her, or, worse, abandon her when things got tough. But with him, everything felt different. The way he listened, the way he didn't try to fix her or solve her problems. He simply accepted her. It was a feeling she hadn't known before, and it scared her. She didn't know if she was ready to give up the armor she had spent years building, to open herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. She wanted to trust him, to let herself love him, but the fear of being vulnerable, of losing herself in someone else, still held her back. One evening, after dinner, they found themselves walking along a quiet street in the city. The world around them was bustling, but in that moment, it felt like they were in their own little bubble. The noise of the city faded into the background, and all that mattered was the gentle sound of their footsteps echoing in the night. They were silent for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, it was the kind of quiet that came when two people were simply content to be in each other's presence. He broke the silence first, his voice soft but serious. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said. "About what we're doing here. About where this is all going." She glanced at him, her heart quickening. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want to rush anything," he continued, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I feel like we're both in a place where we have to decide what this is, what we want it to be." She stopped walking, turning to face him. For a moment, she just looked at him, as if searching for the right words to say. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I don't know what I want, or what I'm supposed to feel." He stepped closer, gently reaching for her hand. "You don't have to know. I don't want to let fear stop us. I want to see where this can go, with you." She looked down at their intertwined fingers, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of trusting someone, of letting myself fall. I've spent so long protecting myself that I don't know how to let go. And you don't have to be ready right now," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking you to trust me with everything all at once. I'm asking you to take this one step at a time, and I'll be here, every step of the way." Her heart ached at his words. She could feel the sincerity in them, the weight of his own vulnerability. He wasn't asking for her to give him everything, he was simply asking for a chance. And that, she realized, was the hardest thing she had ever been asked to do. To let go of the walls she had built, to let someone in, to trust. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want to try." He smiled, his eyes softening with understanding. "Then let's do it together," he said quietly. In that moment, she knew that they were standing at the edge of something important. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead. But, for the first time in her life, she was willing to take a leap of faith, not just for him, but for herself. The next few weeks were filled with new discoveries. They spent more time together, quiet nights in, walks through the city, and moments of deep conversation that revealed pieces of themselves they had kept hidden for so long. They talked about their dreams, their pasts, and their fears. And with every conversation, every shared glance, the bond between them grew stronger. But despite their connection, the doubts still lingered. He was constantly pulled between his work and the desire to be with her. His company demanded more of his time, and there were moments when he wondered if he could truly balance everything. He didn't want to lose her, but he also didn't want to lose the life he had worked so hard to build. For her, the doubts were different. She had spent so long living in survival mode that it was hard to let herself believe in the possibility of happiness, of love. She had been hurt before, and the fear of being vulnerable again felt like a weight on her chest. But with him, it was different. She could feel the way he looked at her, the way he cared, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she was worth the risk. And so, they continued. Not knowing where it would lead, but choosing to take the journey together, one step at a time. Part 7. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind for both of them. Every day brought new challenges, but also new moments of clarity. For him, it was the slow realization that his world, his carefully structured, success-driven existence wasn't enough anymore. The relentless pace of his career, the endless meetings, the constant striving for more, suddenly felt hollow. It wasn't that he regretted his achievements, but with her by his side, he began to question whether all of it had ever truly mattered. She was a constant presence in his thoughts, and despite his best efforts to focus on work, there were moments when his mind would wander, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and how she was feeling. His mind would race with the need to be with her, to explore the connection they were building, to see what could come of it. But there was always that underlying fear, the fear of opening up too much, of giving too much, and then losing it all. He had been hurt before, and while he wasn't as guarded as he once had been, the scars of past betrayals still lingered. For her, the fear was just as real, but in a different way. She had spent most of her life building walls around her heart, keeping herself safe from the hurt and disappointment she had known all too well. She wasn't used to letting anyone in, especially not someone like him, who seemed to have everything. But the more time they spent together, the more she found herself questioning the walls she had built. Could she truly let go of the past? Could she trust him, trust this connection they shared, without the fear that it would all crumble? They had shared so many quiet moments, walking the streets of the city, sitting in cafes, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. She had introduced him to her world, her life, her struggles, her past, and he had done the same, revealing parts of himself that no one else had ever seen. But the question still loomed. Could they ever truly bridge the gap between their worlds? One afternoon, after a particularly stressful day for him at work, he found himself sitting alone in his office, staring out the window at the bustling city below. His mind was heavy with the demands of his job, the pressure to keep up with the pace of his career, and the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. But when he closed his eyes, the image of her, her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at him as if she truly saw him pushed all those thoughts to the back of his mind. He missed her. He had always believed that he could handle anything life threw at him. He was a businessman, a leader, a problem solver. But in that moment, he realized that there was one thing he couldn't figure out: how to live a life without her in it. He took a deep breath and stood up, making a decision in that instant. He didn't want to wait anymore. He didn't want to let fear control him, didn't want to let the weight of his past dictate his future. If he was ever going to truly have a chance at happiness, it was with her. It was time to take the leap. He left his office without another thought, his mind set on one thing: her. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to take the risk. He needed to see her, to tell her how he felt, to make it clear that no matter what happened, He wanted to fight for them. When he arrived at her apartment, he stood outside for a moment, staring at the door. His heart was racing, the uncertainty about what would happen next almost overwhelming. But then he took a deep breath, his hand reaching for the doorbell. She opened the door almost immediately, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Hey," she said, her voice soft with surprise and warmth. "Hey," he replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Can we talk?" Her eyes searched his face for a moment, then she stepped aside, letting him in. They walked into her living room, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, but also comfortable. They had spent so much time talking, sharing, getting to know each other. But this moment where they both stood at the edge of something real, felt different. "I don't want to keep dancing around this," he began, his voice serious but gentle. "I know I've been hesitant, and I know you have too. But I don't want to keep pretending that I'm not scared or that this isn't real. Because it is, and I'm ready. I'm ready to take this step with you, to see where this goes." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Her fears were still there, lurking in the back of her mind. But in that moment, they felt smaller. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the truth of what he was saying. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe it. "I'm scared too," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of what happens if we let this go. I'm scared of losing it." He stepped closer to her, his hand reaching for hers. "You don't have to lose it. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not going to let you go, no matter how hard it gets. I'm here." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, the weight of everything they had been through, their fears, their doubts, their walls finally lifting. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to do everything by herself. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I want to find out with you." End quote. His heart swelled with relief. She was saying the words he had longed to hear. She was willing to take the leap with him, to face the uncertainty of the future together. And in that moment, he realized that everything he had ever wanted was right here, right in front of him. "I'm with you," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." She smiled through her tears, a smile that spoke of hope, of trust, and of the possibility of a future they could build side by side. And in that moment, as they stood there, hand in hand, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they were ready to face it together. Part 8. The days following their conversation felt like a delicate balance. They were no longer just two people who had met by chance. They were building something real, something that felt both fragile and powerful all at once. The moments they spent together, talking, laughing, sharing their vulnerabilities, felt more meaningful than anything he had ever experienced. But beneath that growing connection, there was still an undercurrent of uncertainty, of fear. Neither of them had ever truly let someone in like this, and they both knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. For him, the most difficult part was learning to let go of control. He had always been the one in charge, the one who called the shots, who managed every detail of his life. But with her, he was learning that not everything could be planned or controlled. Love, real love, didn't come with a roadmap. It was messy, unpredictable, and often it was uncomfortable. And yet, despite the discomfort, he couldn't ignore how much he wanted it, how much he wanted her. The fear of losing control was something he had been wrestling with for weeks now. Every time he found himself caught up in the whirlwind of work, the pressures of his career, He would feel the pull of her presence, the desire to be with her, to focus on something that was real and tangible. But he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that, eventually, he would have to choose between his career and her. And that thought terrified him more than anything else. For her, the struggle was just as real, but in a different way. She had spent years surviving, living day by day, learning how to protect herself from the world. Trust had never come easy for her. Every time she had opened up to someone, they had either left or betrayed her in some way. She had built her life on the idea that she was better off alone, that she didn't need anyone else to survive. But with him, it was different. He wasn't asking her to give up her independence. He wasn't asking her to change who she was. He was simply asking her to let him in. And that was the part she couldn't figure out. She was scared, terrified. Even that letting him in would mean losing herself. But, at the same time, she knew that holding back, shutting him out, would only make her feel more isolated. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that what they were building could last. But the fear of getting hurt again was a heavy weight on her chest, and she wasn't sure she was ready to carry it. One evening, after a particularly intense day for both of them, they found themselves sitting in her small apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the silence between them. He had just returned from a meeting, his mind still reeling from the pressure of his work, and she had spent the day sorting through her own thoughts, trying to figure out where she stood in this relationship. They were both tired emotionally and physically, and yet the weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air. The questions, the doubts, the fears, they were all there, silently gnawing at them. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low and careful. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, turning to face her. "I mean, us. Where this could go?" Her heart skipped a beat at the question. She had been avoiding that thought, refusing to entertain it for fear of what it might mean. She wasn't ready to think about the future. She wasn't ready to imagine a life with him, one where they both had to make sacrifices, one where they both had to take risks. "I try not to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "because I'm scared of what it might mean. I'm scared that if I let myself think about the future, I'll lose what we have now." He nodded, understanding. He had been feeling the same way, but he couldn't help it. He couldn't stop thinking about what they had, what they could build together. "I don't want to lose this either," he said, his voice earnest. "I don't want to let fear control what we have. I want to be with you. I want to figure this out, together. Hand and sign." She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. There was a sincerity in his words, an unwavering certainty that made her want to believe him. But the fear still lingered, a constant shadow over her heart. "I'm not ready for this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can be. I don't know if I can give you what you want." His hand found hers, gently, and he squeezed it, his eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to give me anything," he said, his voice steady. "I don't want you to change. I don't want you to be something you're not. I just want you to be here with me. That's all." Tew sighed. She felt the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could take this leap. Maybe she could trust him. Maybe she could let him in. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm scared of losing myself, of giving up my independence." He shook his head gently. "You don't have to lose yourself. I'm not asking you to. I just want to be a part of your life, not take over it. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to take it one day at a time." For a long moment, they simply sat there, holding hands, the weight of their fears and uncertainties hanging between them. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were willing to face it all together. And for the first time, Lila felt a sense of peace wash over her. The fear wasn't gone, but it didn't feel as overwhelming as it had before. She didn't have to figure everything out right away. All she had to do was trust him, trust herself, and trust that, no matter what happened, they would face it together. "I'm willing to try," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'm willing to take the chance." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made her heart flutter. That's all I'm asking for. Part 9. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to their lives. Their days were a mixture of routine and moments of spontaneity, quiet walks through the city, late-night talks about dreams and fears, and the occasional stolen kiss when no one was watching. But despite the growing connection between them, the pressures of their lives still loomed large. For him, the work never stopped. As CEO, he had a constant stream of meetings, decisions to make, and deals to finalize. His company was growing rapidly, and while he was proud of what he had built, the weight of responsibility was starting to take its toll. There were days when he would return home late, his mind still racing with numbers and strategies, and he found himself wondering if this was all there was. Would he ever feel truly at peace, knowing that the world he had spent years building was demanding more from him than ever? But then he would see her Lila sitting in the living room, her presence a grounding force in the chaos of his life. When they were together, the noise of the world seemed to fade. In her company, he could breathe again. She didn't ask for anything from him, didn't expect him to be perfect. She simply accepted him for who he was, flaws and all. And that, more than anything, made him realize how much he needed her in his life. For her, the fear of trusting him fully still lingered. Despite the connection they had, there were moments when doubt crept in. Could someone like him, someone with so much power, so much at stake, truly want a life with someone like her? She had spent so long building walls, protecting herself from hurt, that it was hard to let those walls come down, even for him. The fear of being vulnerable, of giving too much, still felt like a weight on her chest. But when he held her, when they shared those quiet moments, she couldn't ignore the way he made her feel. Safe, seen, loved, and that scared her more than anything. She didn't know how to let go of the fear that had shaped so much of her life, but she knew that if she didn't, she would risk losing something real, something worth fighting for. One evening, after a particularly long day for both of them, they found themselves sitting in his apartment, the city lights casting a soft glow across the room. She was curled up on the couch, a book in her lap, and he was sitting at the window, staring out at the skyline. Neither of them spoke at first, but the silence between them was comfortable, familiar. It wasn't the kind of silence that spoke of distance or tension. It was a quiet understanding, a shared space where they didn't need words to feel connected. Finally, he stood up and walked over to her, sitting down beside her. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice serious. "About the future." She looked at him, her heart pounding. She had known this conversation was coming. They had been avoiding it for so long, letting the moments pass without addressing the reality of their situation. But now, it was impossible to ignore. "I've been thinking about it too," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm scared, you know. Scared of what happens if we take this step. What happens if I give too much of myself to you, and then I lose it all?" He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I get that. I'm scared too. But I want to try, Lila. I want to see what's possible when we're not afraid to take that leap." She looked at him, her mind swirling with doubt, but also with something else, something that felt like hope. The idea of a future with him, of building something together, was terrifying, but it was also the most real thing she had ever felt. "I'm scared of losing myself," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life trying to hold on to who I am, to make sure I don't lose sight of myself. I don't know if I can give that up." He squeezed her hand, his gaze softening. "You don't have to give up who you are. I'm not asking you to change. I just want to be with you, to build something together. You don't have to lose yourself in the process." Her heart ached at his words. She had spent so long feeling like she was the only one who could protect herself, the only one who could take care of her heart. Letting someone else in had always felt like a risk, a dangerous, painful risk. But in that moment, as she looked at him, she realized that maybe the greatest risk was never letting anyone in at all. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take this step with you." His eyes lit up with relief, and he leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's all I need to hear," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "One step at a time. We'll figure it out together." As they sat there, hand in hand, their shared vulnerability felt like a bridge between them, a bridge that, despite the doubts and the fears, could carry them forward into something real. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But as long as they had each other, they were willing to face whatever came next. Part 10. The days after their conversation were filled with both hope and uncertainty. They had made the decision to take things one step at a time, but the reality of their differences still weighed heavily on them both. There were moments when the doubts would creep back in, when he wondered if he was fooling himself, or if she would pull away when the pressure became too much. And for her, the fear of trusting him fully still loomed large. She had been hurt before, and opening her heart again felt like a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. But despite the doubts, there was also something undeniable between them. They spent more time together, slowly weaving their lives into each other's. They explored parts of the city they hadn't seen before, shared stories from their pasts, and grew more comfortable in each other's presence. She found herself laughing more than she had in years, the weight of her past slowly lifting as she allowed herself to experience the joy of being with him. And he, for the first time in a long time, found himself letting go of the rigid control he had held over his life. With her, he didn't have to be the CEO, the businessman. He could simply be himself, vulnerable and real. But the challenges didn't stop. His work was still demanding more of his time than he had ever anticipated. The weight of his responsibilities, his company, his employees, his commitments kept him constantly on edge. There were days when he felt like he was being pulled in 1,000 different directions, and no matter how much he wanted to be present with her, the calls, the emails, and the constant pressure from his job never seemed to stop. One evening, after a long day, he found himself sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him, but his mind elsewhere. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch, reading a book. He could hear the sound of her turning pages, but he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to her. How had he gotten so lucky to find someone like her? Someone who saw him, not for the money or the title, but for who he truly was. But even as he felt grateful for the connection they shared, the pressure of his career kept pulling him away. The demands of his job never seemed to ease. And as much as he wanted to be with her, to spend time with her without the constant interruptions of his work, it felt impossible. She had noticed the change in him, the way he had become more distant, more distracted. He was still present, physically, but she could tell that his mind was elsewhere. She could see the stress in his eyes, the way his shoulders were always tense, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his back. And while she understood his work was important, it was hard not to feel like she was losing him bit by bit. That night, after they had shared a quiet dinner together, she decided to confront him. She had been holding it in for days, but the uncertainty was becoming too much to bear. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. He looked up from his laptop, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Of course," he said, closing the laptop and giving her his full attention. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've noticed you've been distant lately. I get that you're busy, but I can feel the tension between us, and I don't know how to handle it." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to pull away from you," he admitted. "I've just been under a lot of pressure at work. There's always something more to do, and I don't know how to balance it all." She nodded, understanding, but her heart still ached. "I know your work is important to you, but I can't help feeling like I'm just another thing you're trying to check off your list. I don't want to be something you fit in between your meetings. I want to be with you, really with you." His heart sank as he listened to her. He hadn't realized how much his work was affecting their relationship, how much it was making her feel like she wasn't a priority. He had been so focused on keeping everything together, on maintaining the success he had worked so hard for, that he hadn't stopped to think about how it was impacting the one thing he cared most about. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I never meant to make you feel like that. I care about you, more than anything, and I don't want to lose what we have. But I don't know how to make everything work." "Hussein." She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "We don't have to have it all figured out right now. I just need you to be here, with me. I need you to show up, not just in body, but with your heart." He squeezed her hand, looking into her eyes, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how to make everything work perfectly, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't keep putting his career ahead of her. She was worth fighting for. "I'll do better," he promised, his voice filled with determination. "I'll find a way to make it work. I don't want to lose you." Her heart swelled at his words, but she could tell that there was still a part of him that was uncertain, still a part of him that was afraid to fully let go of the world he had built. She didn't want to rush him, but she needed to know that he was willing to make the sacrifices necessary to be with her. "I just need to know that we're in this together," she said softly. "That you're not going to choose work over us, over me." He nodded, his eyes softening. "I'm in this. With you, I promise." And in that moment, something shifted between them. The weight of the tension that had hung over them seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of understanding and commitment. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, but they were both willing to face them. Together. Part 11. The days that followed felt like a new chapter in their story, one that wasn't written in the fast-paced, high-stakes world that had defined his life for so long. For the first time in years, he found himself balancing the demands of his career with the need to be present for her. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when he felt pulled in two directions: his professional obligations and his growing desire to build something real with her. He was learning, slowly but surely, how to make space for her in his life. The late-night meetings, the endless emails, the constant pressure from investors, it was all still there, looming over him. But when he was with her, when they were together, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. She was his escape from the world, the place where he could simply be himself, without the weight of expectations bearing down on him. But as much as he tried to prioritize her, there were still moments when the stress of his career crept in, making him retreat into his own head. He had always been a problem solver, someone who could handle any challenge that came his way. But this feeling of being torn between two parts of his life was new, and it left him feeling more uncertain than he had ever been. For her, the process of trusting him fully was still a work in progress. She had always been independent, self-sufficient, and not used to relying on anyone else. Her life had been one of constant struggle, of learning to survive, not to thrive. And now, as she allowed herself to lean on him, to let him be a part of her life in a way she had never done with anyone else, she couldn't shake the fear that it was all too good to be true. She had been hurt before, and the scars from her past still lingered. She had learned the hard way that people, especially those with power, those who had the world at their feet, couldn't be trusted. They would take what they wanted from her and leave when it no longer served them. It had happened more times than she cared to count. So, the thought of fully opening her heart to him, of allowing herself to believe that he could truly be different, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But every time they were together, every time he looked at her with that quiet intensity, something in her shifted. She felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to trust him. She could allow herself to love him. One evening, as they sat together in his apartment, the city lights casting a soft glow on the walls, he turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotion and vulnerability. "I know I've been distant at times," he began, his voice low and sincere. "I know I haven't always been the partner you need me to be, but I want to change that. I want to be here, fully. I want to give this everything I have." She looked at him, her heart swelling with both love and fear. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I just need you to be real, to be here, with me, in the moments that matter." His heart ached at her words. He had spent so much time focusing on being the perfect businessman, the perfect provider, the perfect everything, that he had forgotten what really mattered. What mattered wasn't the success he had achieved or the respect he had earned. What mattered was her, their connection, their ability to navigate this journey together. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to prove that to you every day." Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. In that moment, she could see the sincerity in his eyes, the promise in his words. She had been afraid for so long, afraid that she would lose herself in him, afraid that trusting him would lead to the same disappointment she had faced before. But now, with him, she felt something different, something real. "I want to believe you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe that this is real, that I'm not just setting myself up for more heartache." He took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice resolute. "I won't let you down. I know I've made mistakes in the past, but I'm learning. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that he wasn't just saying the words he was showing them. And that made all the difference. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice filled with hope. "I'm ready to trust you, to trust us." His heart swelled with relief, and without thinking, he leaned forward, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through and everything they still had yet to face. It wasn't the kiss of two people still unsure of each other. It was the kiss of two people who had decided, in that moment, that they were ready to take the next step. And when they pulled away, their foreheads resting against each other, they both knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. They had each other, and that was all they needed. Part 12. The days that followed felt like a beautiful whirlwind. They had finally crossed a threshold, a place where they were no longer just navigating the uncertainty of their connection, but actively building something that felt real and meaningful. The walls that had once separated them, his wealth, her past, their different worlds began to fade, replaced by something deeper. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it didn't matter. They were both willing to face it together. For him, there was an overwhelming sense of relief that came with finally opening up to her. He had spent so much of his life hiding behind the mask of success, trying to prove that he was worthy of respect and admiration. But with her, there was no need for that. She didn't need him to be perfect, didn't need him to have it all together. She simply needed him to be real, and that, for the first time in his life, felt like enough. He had always believed that success was the ultimate goal, that everything could be solved by achieving more, accumulating more. But now, he realized that the things he had always sought didn't matter as much as the connection they were building. She had shown him that true wealth wasn't found in the material, but in the emotional, in the quiet moments they shared, in the trust they were building, in the way they could simply be themselves with each other. For her, the sense of peace she found in their time together was something she hadn't known in years. She had spent so much of her life protecting herself, afraid to let anyone in, convinced that people would always disappoint her. But with him, there was no game, no agenda. He wasn't trying to fix her or make her into something she wasn't. He was simply accepting her flaws, scars and all. And yet, despite the comfort they found in each other's presence, doubts still lingered. For him, it was the fear that the pressures of his career would eventually pull them apart. The world he had built was demanding, and though he had made an effort to carve out time for her, the weight of his responsibilities never truly left. How long could he keep up the balance? Could their relationship survive the constant tug-of-war between his personal and professional life? For her, it was the fear of giving too much. She had spent so long living in survival mode, learning how to rely on herself, that the thought of fully trusting someone else still felt like an impossible leap. She wanted to believe in him, in them, but the fear of losing herself in the process was still there. She had been hurt before, and she wasn't sure she was ready to open herself up again. One evening, as they sat in his apartment, the city lights twinkling outside the window, he turned to her, his expression serious. He had been thinking about the future, about what this was, and where it could go. He had never been one to shy away from tough decisions, but this one was different. This wasn't about business or success, it was about something more personal, more vulnerable. "I've been thinking about us," he began, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "I don't want to keep hiding from the truth. I know I'm not perfect, and I know I've made mistakes, but I want this. I want you. I want us." She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "But how do we make this work?" she asked, her voice soft with uncertainty. "How do we make this last when the world we come from is so different?" He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. I'm willing to fight for us. I'm willing to make the sacrifices necessary, even if it's hard. I'm not going anywhere." Her heart swelled at his words. She could feel the sincerity in them, the quiet promise that he wasn't just saying what she wanted to hear. He was showing her with every action, every moment they shared, that he was committed to this, and that, more than anything, made her want to believe him. "I'm scared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of letting go of my fears, of trusting you completely." He leaned in closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm scared too," he said softly. "But I want to try. I want to see where this can go. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to build something with you." The silence between them was filled with unspoken understanding. She knew, in that moment, that it wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, fears to overcome, challenges to face, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't thought possible. Hope. "I'm willing to try," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm willing to take this step with you." A wave of relief washed over him, and he pulled her into an embrace. He held her tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, she might slip away. But as she rested her head against his chest, she realized that this was the moment they had both been waiting for. They weren't perfect. They didn't have all the answers. But they had each other, and that, for now, was enough. The weeks that followed were filled with new challenges, but also moments of joy. They continued to learn about each other, building a life that was both uncertain and beautiful in its imperfection. There were still moments when fear crept in, when the weight of their differences felt too much to bear. But they faced them together, one step at a time. One evening, after another late-night conversation about their dreams and what they wanted for the future, they found themselves sitting on the couch, hands intertwined. The world outside seemed to disappear as they sat in silence, the quiet hum of the city filling the background. "I don't know where this is going," she said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "But I know that I'm here, with you." He looked at her, his heart full. "I'm here too," he said, his voice steady. "And that's enough for me." And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what came next, they were ready to face it together. They didn't need all the answers, or a perfect future. They simply needed each other, and that, in the end, was enough. Part 13. The weeks passed in a blur of moments that felt both fleeting and significant. They had settled into a routine of sorts, a balance between their worlds, his high-powered career, and her quieter, more reserved life. The rhythm of their days had become familiar, comforting even, yet the tension between their differences still lingered, always just beneath the surface. For him, the question of balancing his career and his personal life continued to weigh on him. He was still the CEO of a rapidly growing company, and the demands of his position were relentless. It wasn't that he didn't want to make time for her, he did, but the more he tried to carve out space in his schedule, the more the world around him seemed to pull him back in. There were always meetings to attend, decisions to make, and deals to finalize. He had never been someone who could compartmentalize his life easily, and that made the time they spent together feel like a fleeting escape, a brief respite from the constant pressure he felt. But when he was with her, everything else seemed to fade into the background. Her presence was a grounding force, a reminder that there was more to life than work, than the endless cycle of achievement and success. She didn't need him to be anything other than himself, and that was both comforting and humbling. She made him realize that perhaps he had been chasing the wrong things all along. Perhaps true success wasn't measured by the size of his bank account or the number of zeros on his paycheck. Perhaps true success was found in moments like these, moments of connection, of vulnerability, of being truly seen. For her, the process of letting go of her past and fully embracing the future was still a work in progress. She had spent years building walls, protecting herself from the world, from people who had always let her down. She had learned that survival often meant doing things alone, relying only on herself. But with him, things were different. He wasn't asking her to give up her independence or to change who she was. He wasn't trying to fix her or save her. He was simply there, offering her a chance to build something together, something that wasn't based on survival, but on love. And yet, despite everything they had shared, there were still moments when the fear crept in. What would happen if they hit a rough patch? What would happen when their differences became too much to overcome? She couldn't ignore the voice in the back of her mind that whispered that all of this could fall apart. She didn't know if she was ready to risk her heart again, but when she looked at him, when she felt his presence beside her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was willing to take that leap. One evening, after a long day of work, he found himself standing outside her apartment, unsure of what he was going to say. The doubts had been nagging at him again, the fear that his career would always come first, that he would always be pulled away from her, that they would never truly be able to build a life together. But as he stood there, the cool night air around him, he realized that he couldn't keep running from the possibility of something real. He couldn't keep putting off the chance to fight for them. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest. A few moments later, the door opened, and she stood there, her eyes soft but guarded. "Hey," he said, his voice steady but filled with vulnerability. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They had talked before, but there was something different in the air tonight, something more serious. As they sat down together, he took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his voice quiet but resolute. "I know that we come from different worlds, and I know that things haven't always been easy, but I don't want to keep pretending that this isn't real. I want you, and I want to build something with you. I don't want to let my career, or anything else, stand in the way of that." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart racing in her chest. She had been afraid to confront what this was, what they were. But the sincerity in his eyes made her realize that maybe she didn't have to be afraid anymore. Maybe this was real. "I don't want to be afraid either," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've been scared for so long, scared of giving too much, of losing myself. But I don't want to lose this, not with you." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but filled with emotion. "You don't have to lose yourself," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I just want to be a part of your life, to build something together." For a long moment, they simply sat there, hand in hand, the weight of their shared vulnerability hanging between them. The silence was comfortable, not awkward, as if the words they had spoken were enough to fill the space between them. She could feel the warmth of his hand in hers, the steadiness of his presence, and for the first time, the fear didn't feel so overwhelming. Maybe this wasn't as impossible as she had once thought. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm ready to take the leap with you." He smiled, his heart swelling with relief. "That's all I need to hear." And in that moment, they both knew that they weren't alone in this anymore. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever came next. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to take it on together, one step at a time. Part 14. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate balance between growth and uncertainty. They had reached a turning point in their relationship, a place where both of them were fully invested, yet still vulnerable to the pressures of the outside world. For him, the choice to prioritize her and their connection was not an easy one. His career was demanding, and every day seemed to pull him further into a whirlwind of meetings, deadlines, and decisions that required his undivided attention. But in those moments when he was with her, when they shared the quiet peace of simply being together, he knew it was worth the struggle. But the balance was fragile. There were days when the demands of his company pulled him away, late nights at the office, weekend conference calls, the never-ending cycle of emails and strategy sessions. He tried to be present when he was with her, but there were times when his mind wandered. His focus split between his professional life and the woman who had become the most important part of his world. He hated that feeling, the feeling of being torn between two worlds, both of which felt like they required all of him. He wasn't sure how long he could continue to juggle it all. And every time the question surfaced in his mind, he found himself more certain of one thing. He wanted her. And whatever it took, he would make this work. He had built his success, his empire, but without her, it felt incomplete. She was the missing piece. For her, the fear of losing herself in him, of sacrificing her independence, still lingered. She had spent years carving out a life for herself, one where she was her own protector, her own provider. She had learned not to rely on anyone but herself, and now, with him, she was slowly learning to let go of that control, to trust that she didn't have to face the world alone. But the fear of vulnerability was hard to shake. She had been hurt before, and opening her heart again felt like a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. But when she was with him, she felt a sense of calm she had never known before. He was there, steady and unwavering, offering her the safety she had always longed for. And yet, there was still that part of her that feared what would happen if she let herself love him fully. Would he disappoint her like the others? Would he leave once the excitement wore off? Once the reality of their differences became too much to bear? Despite the fear, she couldn't deny how much she cared for him, how much she wanted to believe in them. She wanted to trust him, wanted to build a future with him. But the question was, how could she do that without losing herself in the process? One evening, after another long day for both of them, they sat together in his apartment, the city lights flickering outside the window. She was curled up on the couch, her legs tucked under a blanket, and he was sitting beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with unspoken words, with the weight of their emotions hanging in the air. He could feel her hesitation, her uncertainty, and he knew it was time to talk about it. He had been putting it off, but the time had come. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was perfect when there were still things left unsaid between them. "I know we've been through a lot," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I know there are still things we're both figuring out. But I need to know, are you in this? Really in this?" She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. The question was simple, but the answer felt more complicated. She had never been the type to make promises, not without knowing for sure what the future would hold. But as she looked at him, as she felt the weight of his words, she realized that she was already in this. She was already committed to him, to them. The future didn't have to be perfect, and they didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. "I am," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. "I'm in this. I need to know that I'm not going to lose myself in the process, that I'm not going to lose who I am for you." Oh. His heart ached at her words. He understood the fear of giving too much, of losing yourself in someone else. He had felt it too. But the difference between them was that he was willing to take the risk. He was willing to love her fully and without reservation, even if it meant facing the uncertainties of their future. "You won't lose yourself," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I want you to be exactly who you are. I want you to feel safe, to feel like you can be yourself with me. I'm not asking you to change. I just want to be with you, as you are." Her heart fluttered at his words. He wasn't asking for her to be something she wasn't. He was asking for her to be herself, to trust him with the parts of her heart she had kept hidden for so long. And for the first time in a long time, she believed him. She believed that he wasn't going to hurt her, that he wasn't going to leave once the novelty wore off. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice small but filled with honesty. "But I want to try. I want to trust you. I want to trust us." A wave of relief washed over him as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him. "I'm scared too," he whispered, his voice filled with vulnerability. "But we'll figure it out, together. We'll take it one step at a time. Humaitela?" And in that moment, with the weight of their shared fears and uncertainties hanging between them, they both knew that this was what mattered. Not the perfection of their lives, not the certainty of their future, but the promise that they would face it all together. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Part 15. As the days passed, their relationship seemed to evolve in subtle ways. What had started as a tentative connection between two people from completely different worlds had transformed into something deeper, something far more significant than either of them had expected. Yet, even as they grew closer, the tension between their two realities never quite disappeared. There were moments when the weight of their differences felt overwhelming, when their pasts seemed like obstacles they couldn't quite overcome. For him, the pressure of his career continued to mount. His company was expanding, new opportunities were opening up, and he was still finding it difficult to manage it all. The balance between work and personal life remained an ongoing challenge, but he was slowly learning to prioritize her, to make space for their time together without letting the demands of his job consume him completely. He wasn't perfect at it. There were still days when he had to cancel plans, when he had to make last-minute calls or attend urgent meetings. But each time, the thought of her, of them, was what kept him grounded. He wanted to be with her more than anything, but the fear that his career would eventually pull them apart was always in the back of his mind. He had learned, over the years, that nothing in his life had come without sacrifice, and the idea that his relationship with her, this thing that felt so real, so worth fighting for, could end up being another sacrifice weighed heavily on him. He didn't know how to make it all work, but he knew he was willing to try. For her, the fear was rooted in something different. She had spent so much of her life protecting herself, shutting people out to keep from getting hurt. Her independence was something she had relied on for so long, and the thought of letting go of that, of relying on someone else, of needing someone else, was terrifying. She had always believed that relying on others would eventually lead to disappointment, and she wasn't sure if she could risk that again. But when she was with him, the walls she had built around her heart seemed to melt away. He didn't ask her to change, didn't try to fix her. He simply accepted her, flaws and all. And in doing so, he made her realize that maybe she didn't have to do everything alone. Maybe she could trust him. Maybe, for the first time, she could let herself love without the fear of losing herself in the process. One evening, after another long day of work for him, they found themselves at her apartment. Sitting on the couch, the quiet of the night enveloping them. She was sitting next to him, her head resting on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The chaos of their lives, the pressures of the world, seemed to disappear in that moment. There was only the two of them, and that felt like enough. "I've been thinking," he began, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "About us, about the future." She looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. "What about it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. "I don't know how to make this work," he admitted, his gaze searching hers. "I don't know how to balance everything, but I know that I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his words, and it made her heart ache. He had always been so strong, so in control, but in that moment, He was giving her something that he had never given anyone before: his uncertainty, his fear, and his desire to be with her. "I don't want to lose you either," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I'm scared. I'm scared that I'll lose myself in this, that I'll give too much and end up with nothing." He took her hand in his, holding it gently but firmly. "You won't lose yourself," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not asking you to change or to give up anything. I just want to be with you as you are. I want to build something real with you." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him. She had spent so long protecting herself, keeping everyone at arm's length, that the thought of fully opening up to him scared her. But in that moment, as he held her hand and looked at her with such tenderness, she realized that maybe it was time to let go of the fear. "I'm scared too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to trust you, to trust us." A sense of relief washed over him as he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. He didn't know what the future held, and he didn't have all the answers. But in that moment, he knew that they had something worth fighting for. They had each other, and for now, that was enough. The next few days were filled with quiet moments of connection. They went on walks, shared meals, and spent hours talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. He continued to navigate the complexities of his career, but this time, he made a conscious effort to carve out space for her, to be present when he was with her. And for her, the fear that had once felt so overwhelming began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of trust in him and in herself. But as they grew closer, the reality of their differences still lingered in the background. Could they truly build a life together, despite the challenges that lay ahead? Could they find a way to make their worlds coexist without one overpowering the other? For now, they didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to face the uncertainty together, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could overcome whatever obstacles came their way.